Hi, room 6, Mrs. Weatherly here, and I wanted to do a little bit of talking about frogs because I had been reading you some books about pretend frogs, like the Froggy books and Frog and Toad, but I thought it'd be fun for us to do a little science lesson and learn something about real frogs. So we'll start with this book, and it's Would You Rather Be a Pollywog? And it's starring the one and only Cat in the Hat. And it actually teaches us a little bit about real frogs. It says, "What is that sitting over on that fallen log? I think you can tell me. Of course, it's a frog. A frog lays her eggs in a clump, and that way the eggs seem too big to be eaten as prey." Now, if you remember, prey is an animal that is killed and eaten by another animal. So what it's saying is the frog lays its tiny eggs all in one big clump, kind of like it shows in that picture, so that it looks like a bigger creature that wouldn't easily be eaten by a predator. And remember, we've talked about that a predator is an animal that eats another animal. Inside of the eggs, the tadpoles grow, the gills to breathe under the water, you know. In 2 weeks, more or less, out pop pollywogs. Tadpoles is the other name for baby frogs. They try to blend in. Look under those logs, and I think you will find at least 6 pollywogs. Pollywogs are tadpoles. At 5 weeks, a pollywog changes some more. Hind legs pop out where there were none before. Then forelegs sprout out from 2 lumps by its head. It loses its gills and it gets lungs instead. Its mouth and jaw widen. Its tail starts to shrink. This pollywog looks like a frog now, I think. So here we're starting to talk about the life cycle of a frog. So we had on the other page the clump of eggs, and then the tadpole grew in the egg and hatched. Here we have the tadpole just starting to get its back legs, just starting to get its front legs, and its lungs, because a tadpole, of course, as we know, is like a fish. It lives underwater, but frogs can live on land and water because they have lungs like us. They breathe air. So that gets us to the group that frogs belong to. Frogs are amphibians. That's a big word. Can you say the word amphibian? Oh, nice job. That's a big word. An amphibian is a creature that lives on both land and water. And so frogs, because they go through a life cycle, start out living in the water. And as they grow lungs and legs, they start to live out of the water. So the life cycle of a frog starts with the female frog laying thousands of jelly-covered eggs in the water. Remember, it talked about how they're in big clumps so that they don't become prey as easily because they look like a bigger creature. It takes about 10 days for the eggs to hatch. And then when the eggs hatch into tiny tadpoles, I don't know if you've ever seen a tadpole, but when they first hatch, they are so teeny, teeny, tiny, and they just swim around, and their job is to eat and grow, and that's it. That's their only job. They have a tail to swim. They look just like a fish. Let me get back to that picture so you can see what the tadpole looks like. Right here, see that? Kind of looks like a fish that has a tail. A more realistic picture of a tadpole is right here. That's more what they look like in nature. Tadpole. Now, once the tadpole starts getting bigger, it starts to sprout legs. It starts to grow little legs. Then it has become a froglet. Now, a froglet continues to grow and front legs start to emerge. Emerge means they start to sprout out or grow. At that same time, the tadpole is starting to lose its tail and to grow lungs so that it's ready to live out of the water like frogs do and breathe air. Its eyes and its mouth grow bigger, and the tail keeps on shrinking until it's not there anymore. When the tail has finally disappeared, the froglet has become a frog. Now this isn't a real frog. I tried so hard all weekend to hunt and find you guys a real frog to show you, but couldn't find one. I think it's too early in spring for them to be out yet. So I have this toy frog that my sons have had for a long time, but it looks pretty realistic, so we can just use that. Now frogs that live in colder climates like in Oregon where we live, they will hibernate in the winter, which means that they'll dig down into the mud and sleep all winter long so that they can survive, and they'll emerge in the spring when it starts getting warmer and the nights stop being so cold. So they're not quite out yet now, but we should be seeing them very, very, very soon. Now, as you can see on this pretend frog, frogs have very, very, very long back legs, and that is to propel them when they jump, because frogs are incredibly good jumpers. Now they also have webbed feet because they're really good swimmers as well, because remember, amphibians live in and out of the water. So they not only have the legs for jumping when they're out of the water or on a lily pad maybe, but they also have the webbed feet to propel them to make them really incredible swimmers as well. They also have little suckers, or like suction cups on the bottoms of their feet so that they can climb on slippery surfaces like a lily pad. Or sometimes I see them on the side of my house, and they actually can climb up the side of the house because they have little like suction cup type things on their webbed feet. So they're pretty interesting creatures. Now frogs are meat eaters. Frogs eat insects by sticking out their sticky tongue to catch the insect and eat it. And so they are meat eaters. Now, as we discussed, they have a life cycle, which starts out as eggs. And I have a fun little art project that maybe you can do at home yourself if you have some of the materials. Now, it's what's called a recycled art project, which means that I found things that are pretty typical around the house that we might recycle or even use as trash to make each stage of the life cycle. So let me show you what that looks like. And then maybe if you have the supplies and an adult says it's okay, you can make it too and send Mrs. Barrett and I a picture on Class Dojo from your adult's phone. That'd be so fun. But let me show you what I did. So for the eggs, which is the first stage of the frog life cycle, I used some bubble wrap. Bubble wrap is what protects things when you order them in a box. And I know a lot of us are probably getting things ordered from places like Amazon, and maybe you have bubble wrap around, and then I just took little beads and glued them on there so that it looks like frog eggs. Now, if you don't happen to have a bubble wrap, which you might not, you could also just take a white piece of paper like I have sitting right here and a black marker, and you could just kind of draw clumps of little frog eggs. Now they have little dots in there because those are actually the tadpoles growing in the eggs. And so you could just draw a picture for me of the first life cycle stage of a frog, the eggs. And that looks fun too, doesn't it? Now the second stage of a frog life cycle is the tadpole. Now the tadpole, as you remember, is when the frog hatches from the egg and it's still living underwater. And so the tadpole has gills like a fish to help it breathe underwater. Now what I did to make my recycled tadpole was I took an egg carton and I cut the bottom off. Here's my egg carton. I took my scissors and I cut off a piece of the bottom, and it looked like this after I cut it off. And then I painted it, but you can also, because they're cardboard, you could color it. And then I just made a little tail out of paper. You could even collect a leaf outside to use to make for the tail. And then I put little googly eyes on it, but you could also draw eyes with a marker. And so I used things that I had laying around my house to make that. It's a recycled art project. Now the next stage of a frog life cycle is when the tadpole starts to grow its legs and it becomes a froglet. And so again, I made my froglet out of the egg carton, but I cut out another egg carton and I painted it. This time I added legs because froglets, as you remember, are when the tadpoles are starting to grow legs. So the froglet still has a tail, but we added legs. Now last is when it becomes an adult frog. Now for the frog, I have two examples of recycled art. The first one is made out of, again, the egg carton that I cut out. My son Harrison made this one. He colored it green, and because it's cardboard, again, you can actually use crayons or markers to color it green, or paint, whatever you have around. And then he drew eyes and a mouth, and he had some green clay that he just made little legs out of. If you have Play-Doh, I was thinking you could use sticks, anything like that. This one I made from things laying around the house too. And here's the egg carton that I painted. I had these little pieces of wood like stick that I used for the legs, and again the googly eyes. And then I had a little piece of material that was red that I used for a tongue to show the sticky tongue they use to catch insects. But you could use paper for the tongue, or, well, again, whatever you have laying around. I think it would be really fun if I could see you make the 4 stages of the frog life cycle. Egg, tadpole, froglet, frog. So if you do have time and you want to do the art project, send Mrs. Barrett and I a picture of your eggs, tadpole, froglets, and or frogs on Class Dojo so I can see. I'd be really excited. And I really hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit about frogs, because as we get later into spring, we're going to start seeing the frogs emerge from their hibernation and start seeing them around our yards. And they are really good creatures to have around because they eat the bugs that we might not want, the mosquitoes, some of the spiders, and they keep the insect population at a little lower level so that they don't get too out of control. So they're good creatures to have around. And I hope that you learned a little something about frogs today. I miss all of you, and I will see you in the classroom at a meeting or online reading a story to you again really soon. Bye, everybody.